Boom. Okay. You guys can see the screen? Cover letter essentials?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So myself, my name is Carolyn Darren. I am a career counselor here at LA City College. I'm also a general academic counselor. We are just expanding our services in the Career Center. So you're going to learn about those services as well. But for now, let's go ahead and start focusing on Career Center, or on cover letters rather. Okay, so we're going to talk about what a cover letter is. And then the kind of like elephant in the room question, is anybody actually going to read your cover letter? So first of all, a cover letter, think of it as an invitation or an enticement for the person receiving it to read your resume. It's an opportunity for you to introduce yourself to the person receiving your application materials. And again, it can show part of your personality a bit better than a resume can. I'll talk about the third bullet point. It can definitely, and it should, expand on relevant information from your resume. So as we know, a resume is kind of like a summary or a listing of what you did at a certain job. Your cover letter can mention those accomplishments. Like maybe it could say something like, manned a busy cash register, responsible for approximately $20,000 in cash a day. So that's something you would put on your resume. But in the cover letter, you might say something like, it is like my driving, like it is a driving force for me to provide quality customer service. You might say something like, not only was I able to successfully maintain a very busy cash register, I also take pride in making customers feel welcome in the store. I do this by, and then you would give an example. All of that example would not be in the resume. And again, you're not going to do that for every single point on your resume, but that's what the cover letter gives you the opportunity to do. I think of it as like breathing some life into the key bullet points on your resume. The second factor on this slide is anyone going to read your cover letter? Excuse me, I'd say 50-50. I've talked to recruiters who say they never read them. And I've also talked to recruiters that say they always read it before going on to the resume. So if you're applying for a job and they ask for a cover letter, absolutely invest some time into writing a good one. And I will go into what that means in more detail as we go throughout this presentation. So the first thing that I just want to make sure you know about cover letters is you need to format it like a business letter. And what that essentially means is, you know how like, if you think of letterhead, like that graphic type stationery that businesses use, often it will have their logo on it, but it's always going to have their contact information. Well, if you don't have your own letterhead, that's okay, but you need to have your contact information somewhere on this page, on this letter. You can notice in this sample here, this is not actually a cover letter, but I liked the way this was formatted to show you, because it's formatted exactly as a cover letter could be. You can see that this heading here, where Linda has her information, this could easily also be the heading on her resume, right? So that looks congruent, it looks the same. So you can do it this way and kind of design a nice header to include your contact information. The next thing I need to make sure you know a business letter has, you always put the date. And then you actually write the name of the person you're sending your letter to if you know their name. Nowadays, we often don't. Sometimes we have to just write hiring committee or the company name. Like let's say you were applying for a job at Los Angeles City College. You would have Los Angeles City College here, and maybe you would just write human resource representative, the job title here, if you didn't know the person's name. The address of the place you're applying for, you have to write that all out. And then you address the person formally, either Dear Ms. Lee in this example, or Dear Hiring Committee, or to whom it may concern. You have the body of the letter itself. And then you need to have a nice sign off here, either respectfully or sincerely, and then your name. This person included a title, which you don't have to do. And your contact information, again, should be somewhere on the letter itself, so you don't have to include it here. You can sign it by hand if you're going to be scanning it or mailing it, but it is very common these days to just submit electronic versions, so don't get too worried about that. There are some formatting considerations that I want you to think about. You want to use a professional looking font, so I've given a few examples of those on the slide. 11 to 12 point font, as well as the very smallest margin you want is 0.7 to 1 inch. If you have a lot of information to share and you're trying to squeeze it all into one page, you might be better off just slightly going on to the second page rather than shrinking the margins and making the font really small. Because again, you want to think about the person who's reading your letter. You want to make it presentable and easy for them. You don't want to make them fight to read your 8-point font with no margins, because that's very hard on the eyes. Another tip, you want to save it always as a PDF, because let's just say you use Google Docs or maybe Microsoft Word, something like that to create your document. If the person receiving the document doesn't have the same version of that software as you, it may open and it might be formatted in a different way than what you intended. So if you save it as a PDF, it ensures that your formatting will be retained. One more tip, I actually didn't write this one down. It occurred to me as I was mentioning the PDF. It's important that when you save your cover letter and give it a file name, don't just say cover letter, because again, let's say the person is reviewing your cover letter on their computer and they lost track of it or something, and they're trying to retrieve it out of their database. You want your name to be part of the file. Imagine if they just had 200 that said cover letter, 200 applicants. So put your first name, last name, and then the name of the company, cover letter, something like that, or at least put your last name and your first name and cover letter. That's just another small tip, just to make it easier for the companies receiving your information to keep track of it. Okay, these are some general tips. You want to use a professional tone, something like a business would send to another business. Yes, you can have your personality in there. Depending on the type of job, if you're applying to a very creative field, and maybe even one that has writing as part of its skill, then maybe you can get a little more creative. For instance, let's say you're in marketing or something. I actually heard a recruiter talk about a cover letter that actually started out with the sentence was baby food. And then it went on to a new paragraph. Yes, baby food. This was my introduction to whatever field, and they will go on to tell a story. Now, if you're applying for a more traditional type job, maybe you're trying to be an office manager in a real estate office, they probably want you to be a little more business-like. So use professional language. That means not using contractions, not using slang, not using abbreviations, things like that. You want to front load your letter with the most relevant information. And so you want to think about what the most important aspects of that job you're applying for are, or what types of candidates are most valued in people working in that field. And you want to push that information about yourself in the first main body paragraph or two. So don't save the best for last, because they may not read to the end if the beginning starts off weak. Now, this last bullet point, this is very important, but I want to be honest and tell you this is also incredibly time consuming. So ideally, you want to customize the letter to the job description. Let's say you're applying to jobs in the same field, and maybe good customer service is part of that field. You can pretty much write a paragraph describing your philosophy with customer service or your techniques or some of your successes with it, and kind of put that in every cover letter that has to do with customer service, right? But let's just say there's a certain company that you really want to work for whatever reason, maybe you really like them, or they're in a good location, or who knows why. For that one, you want to make it a little more custom. Maybe they have in their website maybe they have a mission statement or they have information about the company. You might want to grab some phrasing from that mission statement and connect it to your strong customer service skills. So maybe they say something in a unique way, like, our mission is to provide our customers with an extraordinary customer service or customer experience. You could say something, you could tweak that stock paragraph you have about your customer service philosophy or successes. And you could say, just like, I'm gonna say Nordstrom, but just like Nordstrom strives to provide extraordinary customer experiences, this is what drives me in my interactions with the public. So again, that's how you would customize it. Even if you're applying, like using the same information more than once. I do want to say, similar to resumes, we always tell people that you want to customize a resume for each job you apply for. And in fact, in practice, that's extremely time consuming. So again, let's just say you're applying for jobs in like office manager jobs in real estate and office manager jobs in law or something. Well, you might have two different versions of your resume, one that pushes forward your experience in law and the other that is more about real estate. So they might have the same information, just be arranged differently. But again, like if you're going through a job search database, like let's say Indeed or something like that, or LinkedIn, and they just have that button where you can apply and attach your resume. Again, if you're just kind of doing that for jobs that you're kind of like, yeah, I'd be interested in this job, but it's maybe not a dream job, then fine, you can use your stock resume and your stock cover letter. But again, if there's a certain opportunity that you would love to get, that's when you want to put a little more time in and customize. Okay, so we're going to break down some more cover letter components. Some of this I've already actually talked about. So yeah, so this slide is a repeat. We can kind of move on, but the reason I like to include this is a little bit more standard. Notice at the top where it says sender's company name and address. That would be your information. So you're not a company, but you would put, your name. You don't have to put your street address, but if you wanted to put your city, your email, your phone number, etc. So this would be a more traditional way to format it. But again, you can also put that information on the right-hand side of the page if you wish. Just giving you some different options, but this is basically how the cover letter should look. Okay, so here's kind of a formula that we can use when you're starting your cover letter. This is not the body of the letter where you're really going to be expanding on your experience. This is like literally the first sentence. So first of all, you want to be very specific about what job you are applying for. So you don't just want to say something like, I'm interested in working for the Walt Disney Company. Like that's too vague. Again, you want to imagine that the first person who sees this cover letter is going to be someone who works in human resources, and they're trying to decide like what pile your letter should go in. And so you want to be very specific. I'm writing to apply for the accountant 3 position at the Glendora location, something like that. So that's basically how you want to open it. Make it very clear why you're writing. Second bullet point is optional. But if you know someone at that company who is willing to put in a good word for you, this is when you mention that person. My colleague, John Smith, who works for you, thought I would be a good fit for this position or something like that. So if you have the reference, and it's fine if you don't, so don't feel bad if you don't, but it's great to like mention that reference, or something like, I spoke with your recruiter at Los Angeles City College's recent job fair, and I'm writing to follow up on the opportunity she shared with me, something like that. And then you either want to have a little blurb about why, or something to express your enthusiasm about the position, or something to lead them to your first body paragraph. So you could put something like, please allow me to explain how my preparation has made me an excellent candidate for this position. Or you could say something like, I am passionate about web design and think I would be a great fit for this position. Please allow me to explain why, or something. And I'll give you an example here, all fleshed out, so we can like look at all those pieces put together. So again, this would be prefaced with something like, Dear Mr. Smith, I am writing to apply for the Comptroller 2 position. I was excited to learn of this job opportunity from my former colleague, Alex Johnson. He and I have worked closely together for many years, most recently on a complex data analysis project at blah, blah, blah company. He thought I'd be a good match for this position on your team. And so then you could start your next paragraph in which you're going to focus on a main component of that job and explain why you'd be so great at it. So we'll get into that part next. Okay, like I've said, you're not going to talk about every single bullet point on your resume in your cover letter. Again, you're really thinking about, what are my greatest strengths? What examples can I bring in to, again, breathe life into those bullet points and really give the person reading this a sense of who I am in the context of this job or in this aspect of my personality. You don't just want to like rehash the job description and say, I have experience in customer service. For many years, I have worked, with both money and with people. Like, you don't want to do that. But again, you want to give some examples. Okay, so let's look at an example here that we can use. So in the very top box, I copied and pasted an actual job listing. So it's information technology generalist administrator 2. And I put that clunky job title. I didn't make this up. I really copied and pasted. But because this is what you would actually want to write in your introductory paragraph. I know it seems like really clunky and weird, but again, that phrase is going to be picked up by their software if they're using scanning software, or if you have a human being looking at it, they're going to know which pile to put you in. Okay, so that's our job title. The job description is in the second box. Okay, so you have to have 3 years of full-time GIS technical work conducting complex models, analyses, and programming in GIS, developing and managing an enterprise GIS utilizing current GIS mapping software such as ArcPro or ArcGIS SDE, okay, blah, 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 and 2 years of full-time experience in an information technology or supervisory capacity. Okay, so again, I know I just briefly mentioned the software. A lot of companies do use scanning software, and they're going to be looking for the same keywords they put in the job description in your cover letter and in your resume. So let's just say, for example here, like this phrase, this word analyses, so plural of analysis. If you have analysis somewhere in your cover letter, you want to change the phrasing so you can actually say analyses, again, to match as much as possible the phrasing in this description. But okay, this is just a sample of what you could do if this was the description you were writing a cover letter for. So they want at least 2 years experience. So right up front, you're saying I have over 3 years experience in creating complex models in GIS, which is one of the things they asked for, complex models, same phrase, right? During my most recent project, I created, and then you're gonna explain what that is. And then this last sentence is something new that I'm kind of like fitting in here. This is again, matching the company goal with what skills you bring. So here, if you notice, this employer is basically the state of Pennsylvania. Right here, you're telling them that you've done some research on, I know it's not a company, but on that employer, and you're matching, this is what I can bring to help you accomplish your goals. So again, this is just one example, but again, you want to borrow phrases from their job description, and you want to explain something in more depth than you do on your resume. Okay, now the concluding paragraph, and then we're going to get into some do's and don'ts, as well as some samples. Okay, so now you're in the concluding paragraph. You want to thank the reader, just kind of a stock phrase. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you so much for your consideration. I would, I'm like very interested in working for the Walt Disney Company. I look forward to hearing from you soon. That's the call to action. Oh, I just realized I've got this sample here too. You can also kind of reiterate, something unique about yourself and how they can reach you again, although that information is probably on the page. So just a brief kind of token. Thank you. Here's again why I'd love to work here, or here's again why I'm a great fit. I'd like to hear from you soon, or I look forward to that. Okay, now let's go through some do's and don'ts. So again, you do not want to simply repeat your resume. I'm going to be honest with you and tell you, I used to make that mistake. I used to think that I was like, why do I have to write a letter that basically turns the outline that my resume is into text? That's what some people do, but if they do, they're not using the cover letter to the best of their ability. Again, you want to be selective about which bullet points off your resume you highlight, and you want to add information from those bullet points. Okay. Okay, so you don't want to overuse the word I. And this is especially true like in the beginning of your sentence. It's going to seem really natural to start every sentence with I. I have been working in this industry for 5 years. I have led many projects. But you want to get kind of creative with that. You want to put transition words in there like, additionally, or also, or rather than saying, I have experience, you could say, let's see, I was going to say, I also have experience in, say something like in my interactions with customers rather than I blah, blah, blah with customers. So again, like when you're writing the draft, especially if writing isn't your strength, just like put all the I's if that's the easiest way. But you do want to go through it and like kind of edit some of them out just so it's not super repetitive. Okay, this last one, don't patronize them or don't beg for an interview. So like, don't be like, so patronizing is when you kind of like overly praise somebody. And so people can see through that. So don't be like, I would love to work for your hospital. It's the most illustrious institution in Los Angeles. Like everyone knows that's kind of flowery and overdoing it. So don't overdo it. But again, if you do have real sincere praise, like I would love to work in your radiology program because I know how cutting edge it is and how much you've invested in new equipment in the last 5 years. That's sincere. So don't patronize. The other thing is don't beg for an interview. Don't be like, don't be too honest or whatever. Oh, I've been looking for work for so long and I know I could do it if you just give me the chance. No, don't do that. It needs to be very professional. Okay. And again, like I gave in the prior example, yeah, genuinely share why you'd like to work for them particularly. That can really help sell you. Okay, so here's some more examples. These are from real cover letters. So right here, I'm gonna have to ask you guys to jump in. Is this a good phrase or a bad phrase? All I ask is for you to consider my perspicacious, I don't know how to say this, aspiration, and to become an erudite factotum in your organization. What do you guys think? Is that good or is that bad?
I feel like it's a bit too wordy. Like,
Yes.
not really that simple.
I would totally agree with you. This person broke out the thesaurus and went to town. It's way too much. If most people do not know what these words mean, it just makes you look a little pretentious and you're trying too hard. And again, the purpose of a cover letter is to show your personality a bit. And if this is how you're coming across, I personally think this person seems very uptight and I wouldn't want to work with them. So I don't think, yeah, don't overdo it with the thesaurus. What do you guys think of this one? Please, before you blow me off as overqualified, understand that what I am overqualified for is being a department store greeter.
Sounds pretty good.
You think it's good?
No.
Why don't you like it?
I think it kind of sounds a little kind of needy in a way.
Yes. I agree. Again, this person seems to be bending over backwards to like what I'm sensing honestly is like desperation. And I'm not trying to knock it. Like I know we all need to work and that things can happen and things can get scary. But please, before you blow me off, like that is too informal of a phrase, number one. It's saying like I'm only overqualified to be a department store greeter. It just seems awkward. So don't focus on what you're not. Focus on, again, what you can bring to their organization. Excuse me. Okay. Go ahead and read through this one. I was snacking on popcorn. That's my problem. I believe my 5 years of experience in user design, specifically working in the finance industry, will be an excellent match for this job. I welcome the chance to discuss how my qualifications will contribute to your success. Thank you for your consideration. What do you guys think of this one?
Yeah, this one sounds pretty good.
Uh-huh. I think so too. So, I mean, again, they talk about specifically how much experience in what areas and in the finance industry. And I'm only assuming they're applying for a job in the same field. And then the last sentence is just your standard kind of like, please follow up with me. Great. Thank you guys for participating. Okay. So there are a few more just things I want to, just highlight as an example. So again, just pointing these things out to you. Here you have the sender's contact information at the top. It wouldn't obviously have this blue block here. Date, the person that they're sending it to. I'm just realizing that it's missing the actual recipient's contact information. So again, you do want to put the business you're sending it to and their address. That's just standard. Here, this is another thing you can do. You can mention where you found out about this job, like this person does, but notice right in the right off the bat, she names the specific job she's applying for. Okay. So here again, she's making a connection to the job listing, the job description, and she's going on to basically explain, where her experience aligns with that ask in the job. So you can see this is very brief. And again, she's just highlighting some of the main points on her resume and asking for an interview. Okay. This one's a lot wordier. I will just be honest with you because I was looking for examples. This is a cover letter that I wrote to apply for a job back in the summer before I got this position. I want you to look through it. I won't read it to you, but look through it and tell me what you think is different in the cover letter than what would probably be in the resume.
But one thing right off the bat is where you say what your passion is.
Yes. Yeah, so that's not language you use in a resume. But again, this is something that, like, if you're comfortable with language like that, you can say it. If it doesn't feel like you don't have to, but you could say something like, I'm trying to think of a more like different type of job, like skills. Like you could say, I am keenly attentive to detail. That gets across a different feeling, but it still says more about you than just the resume will. What else do you guys see that's different that would not be on the resume?
Well, another thing is where you try to explain that it took 6 years to finish your bachelor's due to your finances, and you're not really going to put your finances onto your
Right.
resume. So
Right.
you're kind of trying to explain it in the cover letter instead.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm glad you guys are seeing this. So yes, again, like what I'm trying to do here is I know that a lot of the students at this college are also going to be going through financial struggles. So I'm trying to say, like, I share a background. I understand students like this. I want to help students like this. And And so again, like, yes, that is not information you're going to put on the resume. Whereas, for instance, like I am teaching this particular class at a university, that's going to be on the resume. But again, it doesn't really tell you much about me other than I have teaching experience. Yeah, so exactly. So this is, again, like this is quite wordy. As you start applying for jobs that are more specialized, you can have like a cover letter that at most is 2 pages. This was still probably, again, like in the 1 to like 1.25 length. And again, when you're starting out, don't feel bad if you don't have as much. You just, again, want to make some connections. And like I keep saying, breathe some life into those bullet points that you can find on your resume. Thank you. Thank you for participating. Okay. So for your next steps, we're really wrapping up. This workshop is kind of a brief one. Write a cover letter for a job that you would like to apply to. So you can go on to like, just LinkedIn, Indeed.com, look for a job in the industry that you'd like to go into and write it up. You can also just write a general cover letter. Like if you want to get a job as like an ASL interpreter or something, or you want to get a job working in the county. You really think about like what experiences have you had that you'd want to explain to somebody to entice them to look at your resume and learn more about you. You can make an appointment with a career counselor here at LA City for us to give you feedback on your cover letter. And you can also attend another workshop. I know that I've been mentioning resume. So we do have workshops, of course, in resume writing. We also have workshops in interviewing, virtual interviews. We have a job fair coming up next week, actually. And we're going to be having some workshops on how to like get the best out of a job fair. So if you want to come to any of our workshops, you're more than welcome. I did include like 3 different, I left off one of the QR codes, whoopsie. But I left our upcoming workshops page here for our QR code for you, so you can easily connect to that web page. And then our Instagram, we often post reminders about upcoming workshops as well as some other career tips. And I meant to include a QR code for you to make appointments, but you can also call this phone number if you'd like to make an appointment with a career counselor as well. So I'm going to stop recording and then I'm going to open it up for questions.